Okay, so we're going to kind of take a little bit of a turn in this video. So we're going to be talking about trigonometric functions, which sounds super complicated and super fancy, and it's super duper easy. On your calculator, if you have one, you might notice this. If not, I'll show you in class tomorrow. There are 3 trig functions, and they are called sine, which looks like sin. That's just an abbreviation, cosine, and tangent. And what these are ratios that help us to find missing parts of triangles. Right triangles. So this only works for right triangles. You may want to put that in your notes. Put a little star. Only works for right triangles. We have an angle called theta. So in every problem they give us, they're going to give us an angle called theta. This is just a Greek letter that they use for the variable for missing angles. So theta is just an unknown angle. Unknown angle. And then there are 3 different sides with trig functions. So you already know every right triangle has a hypotenuse, and it's the one across from the right angle. So that one, we still are going to call that the hypotenuse. And then there is the angle, or sorry, the side across from this angle. So this side that is across on the other side of the triangle is called the opposite side. And then the side next to it, or the side that like is shared part of that specific angle, is called the adjacent angle. Now the first thing you have to be able to do is to label that triangle. So you need to know hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. Opposite is always across from the theta, the unknown angle, and then the adjacent side is going to be the other leg. And then the phrase that you need to know is Oscar had or has a heap of apples. Now, when you first look at that, you may say, okay, why in the world do I care about Oscar or what he has or apples or anything else? But you may start to notice that these letters tell us something important. Okay, so OH tells me sine, and O and H, if you think about our triangle, stand for opposite and hypotenuse. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. All right, and then cosine, that's A and H, which are going to stand for adjacent and hypotenuse. And then our last pair here is O and A, which stands for opposite and adjacent. Now there are a few other ways to learn these ratios to have that memorized. One of them requires you to be able to spell correctly, which I cannot. So this is what I have always used to remember these functions. Okay, so we're going to do one example just where you name ratios. Everything else will require a calculator, so we'll do all that stuff together in class tomorrow. So the first thing I want us to do is name all the ratios, so sine, cosine, and tangent, using angle R. So what I mean by that is we're going to put theta up here in the R spot. So now that I've got theta there, I need to label my 3 sides. So 13 is the hypotenuse. Well, and it would help if I spelled that right, H-Y-P. And then 12 is the opposite side because it's across from the R, which means 5 must be my adjacent side. So when I set this up, all of these are going to be sine of R. So these are, I told you these are like functions, so instead of like f of x or g of x or whatever, this is sine of R, cosine of R, and tangent of R. And then I'm just going to write a note to myself. Remember, it was Oscar had a heap of apples. So that just helps me remember which numbers to pull. So for sine of R, I'm going to set up my function to be opposite 12 over the hypotenuse 13. Cosine of R gives me adjacent 5 over hypotenuse 13. And then tangent of R gives me opposite, which is 12, over adjacent, which is 5. And that's all we have to do. Now, when we switch to the using angle Y, that means instead of where the theta was before, I'm going to put the theta in the y spot. Now, you may not think that that changes anything, and in fact, the hypotenuse is still the same, right? The hypotenuse is 13 no matter what. But now, my opposite is going to be over here on the 5, and my adjacent is going to be on the 12. So think about what that's going to change. All right, so I'm going to set up my functions. I'm going to do sine of y, cosine of y, and tangent of y. Still, Oscar had a heap of apples. But this time when I set them up, think about what changes. The opposite and the adjacent switched. So now sine is going to be 5 over 13. Cosine is now going to be 12 over 13. And then tangent is going to be 5 over 12. So you may notice some patterns there that we can talk about tomorrow. If you notice them, you may want to go ahead and note them so that you'll have them ready to speak up in class.